We'll start in 1 minute. Sarah, what do you think?
Sure, sounds good. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so thanks everybody and welcome along here to Canadian Sport Institute Pacific Powering Podiums program. We're happy to present today. We're going to talk around conversations around youth mental health, which we're kind of partnering with Bell Let's Talk Day. So I'll just try to move my slide along. Okay, so first technical issue. Let's stop and start again. So today's schedule, a quick introduction from myself. Again, my name's Andrew Latham from CSI Pacific. I'm coaching services advisor, and part of my role is to present and develop the Powering Podiums sessions for us. I just quickly want to say a great thank you to Sarah Kiangursky and Charlene Hoare, who are colleagues here at CSI Pacific, for doing most of the work around this one. So thank you very much to both of you for that. We'll have a short game plan update from Sarah, and then Sarah will also introduce our guest presenter, Danelle Kabush. And then we're going to have a few little discussions with our coaches who are managing the field. So this is sort of some examples from coaches within BC. Today we've got Jen Joyce, who is S&C coach with Rugby Canada Women's Program and part of CSI Pacific, and I'm sure many of you will have seen Jen's presentations previously. We have Julie Dunlop, who's the head skating coach of the South Surrey Skating Club. We also have Steph Steiner, who is technical director at Saanich Fusion. It's a soccer club here in Victoria. So Steph's heavily embedded in the grassroots and also involved in some high performance programming. We're then going to take the opportunity to have some breakout sessions and present some case studies for you. So there'll be an opportunity for you to talk with other coaches here. And then we're going to bring that all back together at the end and wrap things up and hopefully come with some takeaways. So I'll step out here and I'll hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining today. My name's Sarah, and I'm the Game Plan Advisor at Canadian Sport Institute Pacific. Before we get started, for those of you not familiar with Game Plan, I just wanted to share a very high-level brief overview of the program and kind of how this aligns with some of our initiatives. So Game Plan is a collaboration between the Canadian Olympic Committee, Canadian Paralympic Committee, Sport Canada, and the Canadian Olympic and Paralympic Sport Institute Network. And through this program, we strive to help athletes in living more balanced and holistic lifestyles. And we do this through our 5 pillars, which you'll see on the screen here: career, community, education, health, and skill development. Within our health pillar, we ensure that we're raising awareness towards health-related services, and we provide facilitated access to resources within our sport network to support athletes in achieving their mental health goals and supporting them in that space. We know through a lot of research that balanced athletes perform better, stay in sport longer, and retire healthier. And of course, holistic athlete wellness is a critical component of this. Just as much as our physical health is taken care of, our mental health needs to be taken care of and become a focus as well. As such, there are a multitude of mental health resources available to Canadian national team athletes throughout the sports system. And we'll share a couple of resources with you at the end of our event today so that you as coaches know what could be relevant for your athletes who may be in need of mental health support. Just a couple of very quick housekeeping items today. We have the chat box and invite you to use that at any point for any questions you have for our presenters and facilitators. Andrew and myself will be monitoring that, and we'll share those questions with our presenters at the end. The webinar is recorded, so if you miss any points of this, then you will be able to view it following the talk here today. However, we will not be recording the case study or case scenario section of this webinar, just more of the informative information for you. Given our packed agenda today and the wealth of knowledge and great individuals we have joining us on the call, we will maybe go slightly over our scheduled time, so I invite you to stay with us if your schedule does allow for that, but we will do our best to stay within the scheduled time frame. So without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing you to our facilitator today. Today we have joining us Danelle Kabush, who is a registered clinical counselor and mental performance consultant. She holds a PhD in social psychology and a master's in sports psychology from the University of Ottawa, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a Bachelor of Arts in French from the University of Washington. For her doctorate, Danelle looked at how coaches and athletes communicate about training in endurance sport and how communication styles are linked to athletes' self-determined motivation. On top of a small private counseling practice, Danelle has spent the last 15 years working as a mental performance consultant through the Canadian Sport Institute. She has worked with many different winter and summer sports as a key member of an integrated support team, working at the national level with sports such as biathlon, cross country, short and long track speed skating, para and road cycling, mountain biking, rowing, to name a few of the many sports she's had an opportunity to service. Danelle has traveled to multiple national and international competitions as a mental performance consultant, as well as provided mental health and mental skills training and countless workshops to a diverse number of athletes, coaches, and staff in their preparation for major competitions such as World Championships and Olympic Games. As a previous professional athlete herself, Danelle's philosophy as a counselor and mental performance consultant has focused on the positive relationship between athlete mental health, overall well-being, and performance. So with that, Danelle, I'll invite you to share your screen and turn the event over to you.
Hey, thanks, Sarah, for the the introduction. Okay, let's see if I can just work the technology as well. Okay. Everyone can see that? Is it full on your screen, Sarah?
It's just on presenter view, so you might need to switch your displays under your display settings.
Is that down here? Wait.
Near the top. So there's show taskbar display settings. Right next to that.
Ah.
Yeah, and then just click swap screens, I think it is. Yeah, that one.
Okay, thanks.
There we go.
Support, Sarah. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining in on the conversation around mental health today on, of course, Bell Let's Talk. So there's lots of conversations going around on social media in the country today, and I'm looking forward to today's interactive time together, and hopefully there'll be some takeaways for yourselves if your coach is on the call working with athletes, as well as your own self in with mental health. As we know, it has been a little bit of an extra struggle throughout the pandemic. So I'm actually just going to start my timer so I don't go over time. And if you're joining us later in the recorded version, hopefully it will be helpful to you as well. So yeah, I'm just going to start by talking about what mental health is as we're having the conversation. So when we think of, and I like making all these parallels with physical health, because in the sport arena, it is often a lot easier to talk about, well, how are you doing physically health-wise with our athletes? But the point of today, I think, is encouraging that conversation around linking it with these physical health and performance conversations as well. So when we're mentally healthy, our emotional well-being is good, our resilience zone is a lot stronger, we can deal with things. And of course, as we know, this pandemic is putting a lot of pressure on everyone's resilience these days. So when you think of yourself, when you're feeling most mentally well and healthy, you probably have a lot of resilience to deal with daily stresses, whether it's with family, whether it's with work, if you're an athlete, managing the demands of your training, connecting well with yourself and your friends and your support network and your community are all things that you do well. On the other hand, we've all experienced mental health declines in one way or another. So I'm just going to talk about some of the early warning signs that we'll see in ourselves or in our athletes. So as we go through this slide, I encourage you to think about yourself in some of these aspects and what you've experienced, because I think the more we're able to touch in with ourselves and our own continuum of mental health and decreasing mental health, the more we'll be able to connect and have these conversations with those around us and our athletes. So if you're eating or sleeping, again, it's thinking of what's your baseline. Are you eating and sleeping a lot more or less than your normal baseline? When we're not doing well, we tend to pull away from people and usual activities that we enjoy. Our energy is typically lower. And we know with athletes, when they're training really hard, energy can be low on some days, but is it particularly low? Sometimes we numb out and shut down and don't experience the highs and lows in the normal range of emotions that we feel in a day normally. Sometimes mental health is actually felt physically, and we often forget when people are either really anxious or experiencing depression. It can show up as aches and pains in different parts of our body, headaches, tension. So it's important to know our high increased heart rate. Everyone's unique that way. If we can be feeling more helpless or hopeless, and the sense of hopelessness might be a little higher in these times with a lot more uncertainty around the pandemic. People can take other behaviors to cope with mental health difficulties. Not as common in athletes, smoking, but sometimes drinking and using drugs can be more in the athlete population. And generally it can affect our cognitive abilities and our ability to focus on our work. Our memory will be more on edge, irritable, feel more confused. So just being aware of how clear your thinking is on your normal baseline range, and how that can change depending on your mental health. So some early warning signs that you might notice in behaviors is you might get more irritable, fighting with family and friends. Sometimes there might be increased team conflicts if you're working in sports, and noticing mood swings that flip quite quickly, not as calm and stable. Again, I'm reiterating some of the things I've just said, but noticing times persistent negative thoughts or memories that when our mental health isn't doing well, we tend to be more these stuck points instead of that fluid flow when we're feeling healthy and resilient. This is more towards mental health continuum. You might hear voices, you might be stuck on beliefs that aren't necessarily true. And thinking of harming yourself when hopelessness is quite high and athletes are feeling despair. They might be having starts, which we call in the mental health lingo is suicidal ideation, when you start to have thoughts of harming yourself or others. You might not have a plan in place yet, but you're having these thoughts. An inability to perform daily tasks, like taking care of yourself. So sometimes some of the first things we notice in those around us, if they feel they seem disheveled or they're not taking care of the normal way they would put themselves together. If you know someone who, puts on a lot of makeup and brushes their hair really well and dresses, takes a lot of pride in their dress, for example, and if that's a severe change in that could be a sign that they're struggling. So knowing again what your baseline is and others are around you. When we determine just a definition, when we're looking on that continuum towards what is an actual mental illness, when people might be diagnosed medically, it's when thinking, feeling, and mood is disrupted to a severity where you're not able to do your daily functioning. So coping, like I said, with all those ordinary demands of life is severely diminished, and that's when it's time to seek help. Just like when we're thinking of the physical injury continuum, with your athletes, is it just a niggle that you can keep working out through, or is this an injury where we need to get you help and find you the appropriate supports? So often as a coach, you can be that first person to have that conversation. How severe is this? How are you feeling? Do we need extra support? So it's the same kind of conversation we can have around mental health. And that said, just to reiterate, we know mental health and exercise are so positively correlated, and it is a huge protective factor and buffer against mental health issues. One book I always recommend if you're interested that I really like, that links mental health and the science behind exercise and the brain and all the positives that come around with it. And during the pandemic, our athletes might react in different ways. Some might end up exercising more through the uncertainty, exercising less, working out less. I was listening to the panel last night. Sarah, I can't remember what it's called, the Weight of Gold debriefing panel. And I remember Kyle Schufelt talking about the importance. He was a gymnast. So we think of gymnasts as being all around active athletes. And he talked about the importance in particular. It made me think of the pandemic athletes that are losing their normal identity and social group around their sport, particular sports where you need a gym, a pool, an arena. And so sometimes encouraging athletes to stay active in ways they might normally, staying active in ways outside of their typical sport. So learning, other forms of exercise that they can keep up their activity level could be helpful when they can't participate in their usual sports. So just reiterating, it is a major buffer, we know that. But when we're thinking particularly about student athletes, whether they're adolescent athletes or college athletes, there are some unique pressures put on them through their parents, through their coaches, through their teammates. They often have the added pressure of academic success when they're looking for scholarships. So they want to they're high achievers in terms of their sport and their academics. So at the same time, what makes it a difficult conversation is sometimes they're less likely to take advantage of mental health service. And we'll talk about what are some of the barriers for athletes around that. So specifically, some higher mental health risk factors for athletes, as I already mentioned, although sport has many positive benefits and stress relievers and the social connection and sense of community, depending on each athlete's unique factors around their drive to succeed. There can be lots of stress to perform on demand, make the team, make it to the next level, get that scholarship, make it to the Olympics along the lines. So living away from home, especially with post-secondary, I'm sure a lot more athletes are at home during this pandemic, but it is another stressor if they're on the road a lot, depending on the travel schedule of their sport. There could be increased risk-taking associated with taking alcohol. Often athletes live very disciplined lives, so they don't have a lot of trial and error balance with trying out with substances. So sometimes when a sport is taken away from them, they can be more likely to turn to other coping mechanisms like alcohol. We know disordered eating is more or less common in specific sports particularly. And even during the pandemic, when we have this sense of lost control or uncertainty, sometimes, unfortunately, athletes will look to control things like their eating, which can become an unhealthy thing to manage that sense of uncertainty. Of course, we know there's higher risk of injuries depending on the sports, particularly concussions can be difficult to manage around mental health and sort of those intangible injuries that you can't really see the progression, and it can vary so differently and really affects emotions and mood and the brain. And then of course, right now we're dealing with the degree of COVID related losses, which puts all these athletes and all of us in general at higher risk to be struggling with our mental health. And recognizing every athlete will have unique losses. They might have parents who have lost jobs. They might be at home. We're lucky, I think, in most of BC, our student athletes can still go to school, but for other places in Canada and North America where they're out of school, it's particularly hard. Loss of social connection and seeing their teammates. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, I just wanted to mention some behaviors that you might observe as a coach that might, just put up the red flag for some concerns around mental health. When there's unexplained weight loss, drug or alcohol use, if you notice, again, it's going back to that baseline. Are they withdrawing from contact with you, their regular amount of contact with you as a coach or with their teammates? Decreased interest in activities they used to enjoy, whether it's related to the sport or hobbies or things they do outside of the sport. Of course, if there's any talk about death or dying or going away, it might be worth having a conversation. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Big changes in emotion, sudden withdrawal, or big bursts of emotion that aren't typical to a particular athlete. Problems with concentration, focusing, or remembering. You might see that on the field of play in sport, or if you're in touch with how they're doing in school. If they have extra complaints out of their typical complaints due to playing their sport, extra fatigue, illness, or being injured that are ongoing that prevent them from participating, that might be cause to to have a conversation. Of course, unexplained wounds or suspected self-harm, and again, relating to emotion, becoming more irritable or irrational in their thinking. So these are all general observations just to be mindful of around the conversations around mental health. But unfortunately, as I've said, there's already a lot of, I think it's decreasing greatly, which is the good news around stigma. Since I've been in the field of sports psychology and mental health, a lot more athletes, well-known athletes are speaking out in the media, but there's still reasons that athletes typically don't seek help for mental health, whether it's poor mental health literacy, differentiating normal distress from real distress. Just like we teach athletes to know what is good pain and this pain needs attention when it comes to physical injuries, in a culture where it's often, athletes are often taught to suck it up and be tough, it's increasing their awareness of what is a good range of mental, emotional wellness, and how do you know when you need to seek attention. So again, this self-reliant culture can be a reason athletes don't seek it out. The stigma I've already mentioned, and sometimes just plain old practical barriers. Getting help can be difficult. Just transport, financial barriers. A lot of athletes, particularly even in elite sport, are still struggling on a very limited income. So financial barriers can definitely be a reason athletes don't seek it out when they're often already paying out money for physio, massage, and all those other things they do to keep up their nutrition and physical performance. I just wanted to mention quickly, I've said some of these things already, but the unique impact of COVID on athletes' mental health. Of course, the goalposts keep moving. There's a lot of uncertainty. If events will even happen, will I be ready? You know, especially with social media in different provinces, different countries, if they're internationally competing athletes, like what are others doing? That comparing with where others are at can be definitely stressful and add to their mental health stress. Feeling socially isolated. Thankfully, we do have technology and there's lots of ways to connect virtually, but you know, adolescents in particular, the young adults, that peer group is so important to stay connected to, so it can be hitting them particularly strong. And of course, for all of us, it's challenging. What are our typical coping behaviors to support our mental health? And a lot of them, like going out, getting together in community in all sorts of ways, are cut off. So it's really challenging us to find new and unique ways of coping. I think a lot of people are going out into nature and getting active, which is great. Of course, everyone has different responses to this pandemic on an emotional level. You see different levels of anxiety, from high intense anxiety around getting ill or a family member getting ill, or sometimes they have parents or grandparents who put extra pressure to stay isolated. And so everyone has completely different emotional responses to this pandemic. And I think it's important not to judge those responses and teach athletes and ourselves not to judge our own ups and downs through the pandemic. Feeling lost and beginning to overthink when we don't know how this is going to turn out. It can feel, particularly for adolescents, like a really long time frame. I reflect back to when I was a teenager competing in sport, how much longer a year or a season can feel. So I think it can be particularly difficult for youth and adolescents when a whole season can feel like a lifetime. So that's particularly hard in this pandemic when we don't have a definite end to it at the moment, although I think there is a lot of hope. So, and just the whole, you know, acknowledging with your athletes, it's a lot of losses and grieving. And so sometimes what might show up as anxiety or depression is just acknowledging all the losses, and that they're all unique for each athlete, and it is something that you're grieving, and it's okay. So that's an important part. I did want to mention one way of seeing the pandemic. Some people have called it like a collective trauma that we're all experiencing. And then, as I was saying, it uniquely affects each of us differently in our nervous system and how we're responding to it. And I was talking earlier about our zone of On here, it's called optimal arousal zone, thinking of our nervous system. So just thinking about where you are when you're feeling in that healthy, resilient zone. So this is just a slide, where we can tolerate feelings well, we can participate in life, we feel relatively safe in our environment, we're not high in anxiety or shutting down in depression. We feel open and curious and all those things that signify mental health and well-being. And so this is just a slide to look at when that optimal, I think when we're doing well, that optimal zone in the middle is quite wide and there's a lot of flexibility in it. When we're not doing well, it narrows down and we feel pinned in a corner and we either can shut down or dissociate or withdraw, or we get into hyperarousal where we feel really panicky and racy and high anxiety, and it can flip back and forth between the top two zones when you're not doing well, or you can see athletes when I talked about that really high irritability or emotional up and down. So just sort of a visual to give you to think about that, and maybe as an educational tool if you're talking about this with your teams. This is just more of a fun view of it as seeing it on a continuum. And so we're functioning optimally in the middle, and we don't want to be on either end. And that's when it's time when we see it in ourselves or athletes, it's time to take a break, check in and see if you need a little extra help. This is coming back, I guess, to barriers in athletes. I've already mentioned most of these things, but there's a few new things I found this nice article, which you can look up online on circ.ca. It's a great resource for supporting the well-being of athletes, and just has a few other things to consider which might prevent athletes from seeking mental health help. I'm not going to go into it too much at the moment because I know I'm getting short for time. So I just wanted to a few other things for supporting athlete mental health, which are kind of reiterating what the points I showed on the slide before, but just thinking of your own team policies or your own protocol in addressing mental health with your athletes. The more open you can be about having the conversation, the more athletes will feel they can approach you. I think it's important to have your own support network, own referral network in place. So if you get an athlete who might need more assistance, you can point them to, just like a physical injury, you have limitations as a coach to assess, have the conversation, and then maybe triage them out to the most appropriate referral, being aware of the signs and symptoms in the athletes. Investing in the coach-athlete relationships, just taking time to check in. I think in a virtual world, that's even more important when we only see each other from the shoulders up. It's hard to really see the full physical view, where you might have more signs of how someone is doing. So it's important to check in more often. Be aware of any athletes having extra risk factors that you might want to be aware of. Of course, the COVID layer can just add extra pressure to injuries that might be going on, retirement, transitions, external pressures, like I already mentioned, the collective pandemic threat, pandemic trauma responses. And the more you can address team hierarchies through just transparency of how you're doing things, making selections, focusing on skills, giving each athlete on the team a role can be really helpful to support their mental health. Encouraging conversations. I already mentioned knowing your limits as a coach and having referrals. Here is just a few resources. If you're a coach and want to increase your own mental health literacy, there's mental health first aid courses you can take online. For language related to diversity included in sport, there's a great website called youcanplayproject.org. There's tons of books out there. I just put one I'd recommend, Don't Call Me Crazy. 33 Voices Start the Conversation About Mental Health. It has athletes, performers, and lots of stories just to reflect on. As far as conversation starters, it can always be helpful just in that assessment phase. If you've noticed someone seems out of sort, not their normal self, just checking in. Don't be afraid to ask. You often hear that when people are struggling the most. They really appreciate when someone can just directly ask them the question. Acknowledging that something's going on. Maybe they have struggles at home, maybe something's happening with their parents, anything you want to talk about, any way I can support you. There's often an expectation for coaches to be part of an athlete's mental well-being from parents. And sometimes athletes might open up to you more than they would with their peers or the parents, depending on the relationship. So anything that you can offer to help an athlete get through it, if it's connecting them to someone, even being, it's okay to be transparent. I don't know what to do. I'm not sure what to do, but let's find someone what to do about this, but let's find someone you can help. You know, just maybe in this virtual isolation, it can be helpful to check in with individual athletes, or I know with some of the teams we've all been working with, having these virtual meetups even once a week can be a healthy place to keep people connected, even though it's not the same being on screens. I'm going to give Sarah credit for sharing this in a mental performance meeting this past week, and it's a really great acronym of how to approach an athlete who you feel might be struggling. To remember just to assess and assist with any crisis. Listen, the more you can be non-judgmentally and not unreactive, the more open athletes will feel that I can go talk and share something that I'm struggling with. Any information and reassurance you can have is helpful. Encourage the person to reach out to appropriate professional. And again, always even checking in with athletes. Who are your supports outside of this team and me as a coach? You know, assessing their other supports. And of course, being as present as you can for your athletes around their mental health means hopefully you're also taking care of yourself. So when there is a crisis, like a major death on the team or someone who is feeling suicidal, it is a lot of emotional work to help someone through these things. So making sure you're resetting yourself and getting the support you need as well. And Sarah also put together some nice resources as far as crisis assistance. So again, the more you can have these on hand and know that there's other supports outside of yourself. There's a lot of online chats that are accessible for youth and to overcome some of these financial barriers, even depending on your community. I know here in Victoria, there's a few community-based counseling centers that offer low-cost counseling. So depending on your community, and you're perhaps looking at what might be available and having a few resources that you can connect to as a coach to be able to refer your athletes out to can be very helpful. So I know I've probably gone over time, so I'm going to wrap it up there and hand it back over to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Danelle, for the great information, and certainly we'll pass along this slide with the resources as well, and I'll pop another link in the chat box for a few that Game Plan has made available. But Andrew, maybe I'll pass it over to you, and you can introduce our coaches who have joined us today to share some of their experiences. And thanks so much, Danelle. We'll be working with you again during the breakout session, so thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah, and thank you, Danelle. So first of all, we're going to have Jen Joyce. Jen is CSI Pacific S&C coach and is currently embedded with the women's rugby team. Jen has done some presentations for us before, did a great series on coaching last summer, which I'd encourage all of you to take a look at if you can find it on our website. So Jen, I'll get out of the way and hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just gonna share my screen. And then put it in presentation mode. Okay, hopefully that is full screen. So thanks for having me today, and thanks Danelle for the awesome introduction. Super thorough, and I thought there's some really great resources from those conversation starters to like knowing your scope and your role. So yeah, awesome introduction. And then I guess what I'll do is just give a bit more of an overview of how I implement some of these things as a coach. And so my title page here, this is a picture from this morning, actually. First thing we did when we came in, we meet at 7:30 in the morning to do a mobility session for a half hour before like med check and taping before our field session. And so we took 5 or 10 minutes at the start of the session this morning to just come together as a group and for everyone to write some thoughts down about what mental health means to them and share some of that. So I think it's one of these things that Bell Let's Talk Day gives us another opportunity, another reminder of, you know, how to start the conversation and that the conversation is important to have. And I think as coaches, it's our job to take that and carry that forward throughout the year. And so it's not just an annual event that's like a social media opportunity, but this is something that's a living and breathing part of your coaching practice. So the first key for me as a coach is just really building those relationships, and really important to just get to know your athletes, get to understand them. Some big rocks for me is getting to know their why and what their goals are. And once you kind of know that, then that's easier to connect, you know, find some common ground and then and start to build that relationship. But it's really difficult to, you know, be a resource for someone that may be struggling with mental health if your athlete doesn't know you and you don't know them and they don't trust you yet. So getting to know them and building trust is absolutely fundamental to be able to build a really healthy environment. There are some athletes I've worked with that come in and they're like, this is what's going on with me. Here's what I'm dealing with. I'll tell you, like, if I'm having this kind of a day, I'll tell you. And there's some athletes that have really done a lot of work already and come with a really solid set of coping skills and ways to identify, you know, what they're dealing with and that kind of thing. But by and large, especially, I work more with development athletes or sort of senior national development team athletes that are still figuring that out and on that journey themselves. So a lot of times you're walking alongside them, helping them figure out, you know, like that list that Danelle gave us. There's a lot of maybe things that are red flags that they don't even realize are things going on for them. So we can sometimes help to identify these things for them, and along with doing that helps to build trust and build that relationship. And one thing that I've found really useful, that I've just learned the hard way enough times that I stopped doing this, but it's just giving the athletes the benefit of the doubt, no matter what. So whether that's like them forgetting to do something, you know, totally dropping the ball on something important, to like my classic as a strength and conditioning coach, I'm like, what are you doing right now? And like, meanwhile, they're like laying on a lacrosse ball that I can't see. And I'm like, oh, sorry. So it's like, I'm just, whether it's big or small, I try and give my athletes the benefit of the doubt that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And what happens if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they have dropped the ball or something else is going on, by you approaching them, giving them the benefit of the doubt, more often than not will allow them to respond from not a place of defensiveness, rather than you coming at them like, why didn't you do this, or what are you doing, or whatever. So for me, that's been a really important strategy that allows the athlete to see, oh, my coach does have trust in me, I dropped the ball, and it sets up a really nice dynamic. The next big key for me is then those athlete check-ins. So depending on what programs I've been working with, we've had different levels of ISTs, support available, technology, resources, that kind of thing. And so depending on what's available, there's just different ways of having those daily check-ins. So whether that's like an app on their phone that they punch in how they're doing every morning, or whether that's like a verbal check-in every day, or whether you're only seeing your athlete twice a week and you're having a check-in at that point, or maybe you're only seeing them a couple times a week, but you do have some sort of technology, you know, gathering information. I think that really important thing for us as coaches is a lot of times we're good at gathering information and we're not great at looking at it or following up. And so for an athlete to know that if I fill in my morning wellness, or I'm asked to do XYZ, you know, if I put that I'm a 1 out of 10, is someone actually going to follow up and check in with me? And so really key to have those follow-ups and those one-on-ones. And then another thing to consider is these relationship building, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's within your staff, within your team, is that in your YTP? Is that something that you're actively saying, okay, once a month, I'm going to make sure we have a team event. Once a month, I'm going to have a day where I go sit at Starbucks and my athletes come through and we meet, or a quick sideline conversation. Or one thing I used to do is with my attendance sheet, I would just check off if I've had a meaningful conversation with that athlete that week. So just as a way that you're capturing that these things are ongoing. It's one of those things, if we don't plan for it, things can, like, days and field sessions and weight room sessions get busy and it can fall off. So just really making it part of our routine as coaches. And this just really tags on to what Danelle was talking about. Really get to know your red flags. And the more you get to know your athletes, the more you're gonna learn what's a red flag for that particular athlete. So if I have an athlete who I know has maybe some body image stuff going on and maybe some mental health stuff going on, and I get a message from them, you know, in the evening asking if they can do double conditioning the next day, like, for me, that's a red flag. And, you know, some coaches might be like, oh, that's great, you know, like, they're such a hard worker. But little things like that, if I know that that athlete struggles in that kind of an area, that might be a red flag, whereas that might not be a red flag for a different athlete. So just know the individuals and know, try to know what's going on for them as much as possible. And, you know, just being a part of the Sport Institute has been just such an amazing experience for me in the last 7-8 years. And I get to work alongside Danelle and Charlene Orr and Kristen Barnes and some of these mental performance professionals. And they've been so helpful over the years that if there's something coming up, same with our nutrition, because our dietitians can be, there's such a large component of mental health tied in with food and nutrition at times. And so just having people like that you can bounce ideas off of as a coach and get feedback is really huge. So whether you have that currently, or maybe that's what you need to build around for yourself as a coach, having, you know, a few mental health professionals that you can go to for support, like, hey, I've got this situation, like, what do you think? And, you know, is this a situation where I need to refer out? You know, how can I approach it? What language can I use? So I think that can be really important. Then the last thing I want to share, I know I don't have a ton of time, so I just want to wrap up. This is some of the monitoring tools that we've used in the past with some of the athletes and the programs I worked for. So this Rugby 7 subjective monitoring, I've also used the same one with our sports school program in the past. So every morning they would fill out this particular screen. And then from that, you'd be able to follow up, whether that's something physical or something mental. This is something that we're currently using. So instead of them rating themselves on a 1 to 10, they're rating themselves in one of these 4 categories. And then this is also an example of something that we've used with the sports school, where we don't have a full IST, but it's something we would give out periodically, maybe twice a semester, that kind of thing. And from that, if we get sort of a yes to any of those, then that's something that, you know, might be sort of normal behaviors, and it might be something where there's, you know, if there's one yes, maybe something that's easily explained. And if there's, you know, 5 or 6 yeses, is probably something a little deeper going on. I remember I had an athlete that checked yes to, I often feel sad or depressed. And I said, so I followed up with him and I said, hey, just wanted to follow up about this. Like, you know, just if there's anything you'd like to chat about, like, here for you type of thing. And he was like, oh yeah, the day we filled that form out, my favorite rapper had just died. I was really sad. And so it was one of those things I was like, okay, well, then otherwise all good. Oh yeah, it was just that one day. I'm like, okay. So just kind of funny, but you know, you never know what's going to come out of those conversations, and those athletes, you know, even if it's something small, at least they know that you care, and you're building that trust and rapport with them. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. So Andrew, I'm going to stop sharing and then I'll let you.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks very much. So I'll pass over to Julie, who is currently head coach of the South Surrey Skating Club, but has been working overseas previously. So Julie, I'll hand over to you.
Great, I'll start sharing my screen here. Okay, can everybody see that? We're good. So thank you for having me participate in this conversation. As Andrew said, I'm the current director at the White Rock South Surrey Skating Club. And previously I was the head coach and the director for the Reykjavik Skating Club overseas in Iceland. And I was a national team leader for the Icelandic Skating Federation. So I'm going to talk about my experiences today. I've been teaching for 35 years and I've had 4 experiences to do with mental health. My first scenario that came about was years ago. It was probably 15 years ago. There was no signs or symptoms of a skater, and she successfully ended her life, which impacted all of our skaters in the program, obviously. So I started looking into something that really there wasn't a lot of information out there 15 years ago like there is now. Then when I was in another country, I had a skater come to me at the end of a session and let me know that she was pretty clear that she was making a plan probably for that night of what she was thinking about doing. And then just a couple of years ago, I had 8 skaters show up from a school on my program, and I have a competitive program and a recreational program, and some of them skate in both. And a lot go to school together. So there's a funneling of different kids between programs. And one of our skaters who we've had to previously support had a suicide pact with another girl from school. And unfortunately, the girl she was with had passed away and she survived. So the 8 skaters had come, and one of them was quite traumatized by it all and stated that, you know, there was different things going on at school, things called battery acid being used, and it was quite traumatic for us coaches at the ice when all of this came about, because she spoke about different things to all of us in different ways. So when this all happened, at first, my first instinct was, what's going on and what am I doing wrong? Then my second instinct was to try and take action and think about the signs and the symptoms that maybe I'd noticed before, especially with the first incident that I had. What could I do better? How can I fix it? And at that time, 15 years ago, there really wasn't a lot of resources out there like there is now. So I started to put together a plan for any coaches that I was with, a team of coaches, a board of people that maybe are involved in the skaters. What do I need to do? Who do I need to talk to? What kind of chats do I need to have? Are they with the resources? What kind of lists can I make? What kind of plans can I make that can maybe change the perspective of what we're doing at the rink? And maybe using the word performance training and wellness training instead of mental training with my athletes, so that there's no stigma surrounding coming to any of us coaches or myself when they're not feeling well. So I have skaters at the age of 9 to 18 in my program, some of them all skating together on different sessions. Some of the things I've noticed are they're unable to carry out even the easiest skills on the session if they're having some issues. Reactions to the skills when they're unachieved on that session, how they're handling the unaccomplishment. There's lack of motivation, like Danielle has said. There's lack of participation maybe in the program or in their own skating. I notice lack of eye contact a lot of times if I'm teaching a lesson, or how they're engaging with others on the ice or myself or other coaches is really a good indication of something's not right. Distraction sometimes, or a change in behavior on the ice, which sometimes is extreme, and then that becomes the distraction for a lot of the others on the ice. There's overcompensation sometimes that I've noticed with their skating skills or their mood or behavior. So they're feeling down, but they're acting the opposite, and that's not really the way they are. And truthfulness. Sometimes you ask questions, and for us coaches, we need to look at them and say, do I believe it? Is that really what happened? Can I read more into this, or and try and piece it all together? Because as a team of coaches where I teach, sometimes they tell one of us one thing and one of us the other thing, and don't really recognize that maybe we talk. So having said that, that's pre-COVID. Then we went through COVID, and what I recognized was there was some communication that started happening with the parents when they were home with the kids, a lot more of the time than we were with the kids. So they're reporting, crying because they're not at skating, and there's some whining happening and some tantrums and some change in behaviors. The lack in social skating friends really made them become needy, perhaps shy. They came back to the arena once we did get back, or they came back online when we offered some online opportunities to have some Zoom courses or some Zoom talks, or just even some Zoom gatherings that they could all be together, and we could maybe make this better. And we noticed that there was a little bit of shyness and a little bit of change in behavior, but it started to get better by the time that we got back to the rink. So organizing these things, planning these things, and preparing for maybe the challenges of returning to maybe what is coming months from now has been a really good thing for us as coaches. What I am noticing though at the rink is masks are seeming to create an emotional facial block. So when we're teaching and learning during skating, reading facial expressions and feeling what the other person is feeling by looking at their whole face rather than just their eyes has been really difficult. The responsiveness, the ability to hear properly what people are saying, this has been a really big issue for us during the return to rink right now during COVID. So I'm hoping in the next few months, when things maybe open up by the summer, this will help us even more, that we can see people's faces and how they react when you ask questions. So I took it upon myself to, after the last scenario, the last couple of years, go to the school and really speak to them about the skaters that we have in our program that go to their school. What kind of resources can they offer us? What kind of support can they offer us? And how can we work as a team together to help our athletes succeed and still be really good at school when they leave the rink? So they were kind enough to share the kind of information they had. And then I took it upon myself to actually call some of these, and I'll show you the list later, of support groups and different resources that are out there, or places you can call as a parent or as a coach. Even as yourself as a coach, when you're unsure of what to do, they help you. So we've basically formed a partnership, and the information sharing has really been a plus for our program. If they're finding anything's going on at school, I usually, I'm in consistent contact with them, or if I'm finding anything's going on at the rink between some of the skaters together, or, something I've noticed or heard about, in their life with what's going on at home. It's been a real plus to make a partnership. When I was away and I was traveling, I had to look into information per country, because every country you go to has different rules. And who do I report into? How do I report issues? How do I get support if something comes up when I'm away? Here's some of the information that I got from our area. The START program has really been a great program for me. If I find that I have any even young athletes that have any issues, or parents have any issues, there's a number there that I can call and ask for help. and find out, you know, what the best way to handle it and what should I be doing. I can call them if I need to report in that they don't want their parents called, and they'll anonymously get a hold of the parents and fill them in on something. And then I'm not breaking the trust of the athlete if something's not right, which is really super important, because you want to be open as a team and you want them to feel comfortable and feel that it's healthy to be able to talk about how they're feeling, like everyone else has mentioned. This was one of the other resources that I keep on hand. I do keep them in our first aid kit rinkside, and I also have a book that I keep rinkside with our accident reports that I keep this with, so that everybody that's on our ice knows where they are. If they want to go and get the information themselves because they don't want to ask one of us, then our athletes know they can go and pick that up. They don't even have to speak to one of us, but it's always shown to the athletes, and all of us coaches have team meetings and consistently talk about anything that comes up, and we have the availability to the information. So I feel like taking the plan and having a protocol and having everyone know that it is available has really helped our program, and that, you know, there is availability for everyone to be open about it, and that the rink is a really safe place where we're culturing a positive, healthy situation for everyone. And I always tell my athletes, reaching out is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Okay, thanks, Julie. That was great. So finally, we'll hand over to Steph, and Steph's just going to talk a little bit about some of his experiences in his environment.
Thank you, Andrew. And wow, I'm blown away to be part of this with all these professionals and all these this wonderful information. I, to be honest, wish I had this before all these case studies I'm going to talk about now. So thanks, everybody. Andrew asked me to put together just a few examples of some of the stuff I deal with and have dealt with at Saanich Fusion Soccer. And I'm just going to get into it and just talk about it here. I'm going to kind of keep it quick. Looks like we're getting ahead of time here. So this one example just happened about a few months ago, and it was really interesting to me because I learned a lot from it. Same old story of U10 girls soccer, who none of the kids want to play goalie. And, you know, what does the coach do? And he had one girl specifically who said, hey, I don't want to play goalie. And the coach was like, well, you know, we kind of need everyone to take a turn. So, you know, he tried to work with her and talk with her, build her up. And anyway, he tried to put her in goal. Didn't work. She had a meltdown, cried. They had to take her out. So he asked the parent, hey, you know, what can we do here? He tried to help. And he asked the parent for help, and the parent said she has no problem with playing goal. She just really wants to know ahead of time that she's going to play goal. And he was like, okay, nope, okay, I get that. So a few weeks later go by, and he, before the game, asked her to go in goal. And that doesn't work. She again cries, has meltdown, doesn't want to go in. So he brings me involved and gets me to, and we decide to talk about with the parents and him, and we sit down, we have a nice proper meeting, and we talk about it. And it turns out that it was more her anxiety of not knowing throughout the whole week, that she stressed about the whole week if she didn't know if she was going to be the specific person who went into goal, that was stressing her out. And it turns out that she just wanted to know like a week before. Which I found very interesting for someone who's stressed about being goalie, that she actually wanted to have more time. Usually in my experience, I've found someone doesn't want to go in goal, doesn't want to stress about it all week that she has to play goal. So anyway, what we did was we decided that, okay, no problem. We'll give her a full week's notice, and we gave her some time to train during the week. And we made sure that she was playing against one of the weaker oppositions. So, you know, it turns out she went in goal, and a few weeks later, and she had a great experience. And now she's actually one of the better goalies on the team, surprisingly enough. As long as we give her a heads up, it seems to work. But the big thing that I took from it was for us as coaches to try to collect as much information as we can. And if you have, at the younger ages, especially if you have to involve parents, it's important to sit down with them and hear from them and really get to the specifics of the anxiety. And that's what I really took from that. And it, sometimes we have to put in the time, but it goes a long way. So now this young girl is enjoying soccer and wants to come out. So that was one that was meaningful to me. Now I got a couple others here that I want to share. Another situation was last year over the Christmas break. We have about a month off at soccer, and it's winter time, and it's everyone gets a little bit just depressed a little bit. So this one girl we noticed didn't come back to soccer for over a week, and I put out a phone call to her parents and asked, hey, what's going on? Why hasn't she come back? And they said, well, she just hasn't been doing that great. She just doesn't seem to want to do anything, and she's just at home on her TV, all the usual things, doing her TikToks and stuff. So I put it out to them. I said, hey, why don't you come out with her to one of the next practices, and maybe we could just chat together, the three of us. And so she came on out, and we just had a quick chat, and I started to try to ask her, hey, how you doing? And what have you been up to? And she was very quiet and all that. And I asked, well, hey, do you like soccer? And she's kind of, again, didn't really answer me and was very quiet and shy. And I finally threw out the, hey, what is your favorite part? What is your favorite game? What do you really like about soccer? And she mentioned this game Destroyer, where the kids get to run around and smash balls at each other, and they go and check people and the ball goes away. And anyway, she said, I really like Destroyer. I was like, well, hey, if we play Destroyer, would you come back and play soccer with us? And she's like, yeah, okay, I'd try. So anyway, we said, okay, well, we'll bring you in today. And she came and played, and of course we tried her game, and we tried to reassure her that everything's going to be fun and good. We kept a nice positive environment, and she kept coming back. And basically after a couple weeks, we talked to the parents again, and they just were so thankful that we were able to get her back participating in sport and running around and getting some fitness. And they mentioned that she's been back to her normal self. And it goes to what everyone's been talking about here, is just how much exercise is an important part of everyone's mental health. So that was a really big one for me, that just made sure that exercise is such a good important thing. And the last little case study I was going to talk about was when we had a new player come to our team. This was a couple years ago, and it's been a great asset for me ever since. We had a girl come, and she was new and very quiet, shy, very timid, didn't really engage with anybody to start with. So my other coach and I, we found out that she had one girl who she went to school with. So we partnered them up right away when we did little partner exercises, and made sure that person was with her when we did games and small-sided stuff. And that seemed to work okay. We noticed on our very first break together that she was isolated and no one was talking to her. So we went over to our two captains and we asked them, hey, can you, on break, make sure you go over to her, kind of bring her into the group and make her feel comfortable. And that paid a huge, that was just so successful, because right away that having the peers help her out and bring her along made her feel welcome and a part of things. And then, as coaches, we were very patient with her. We were very supportive and very, positive with her, but we didn't try to talk to her too much. We more tried to use the approach of having the peers, and we were talking to her peers a lot. Some of the other girls, hey, go over and, make sure you chat with her and see how she's doing. And to be honest, within a couple weeks, this girl came to life and her personality started shining, and she turned into a very loud, personable, fun girl to have around. And it was amazing switch from, quiet and shy and not feeling part of things. And then all of a sudden, once she felt part of things, it just totally opened up her personality. And it was just a beautiful thing to see. So, yeah, so that's kind of the examples that I had for you guys. And yeah, just want to thank everybody again for me, because I learned a lot today, and I look forward to taking some of this information with me and using it in the coaching that I do. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, thanks very much, Steph. Thank you for that. And again, thanks to Julie and Jen for sharing some of your experiences there. Now, in the interest of time, what we're going to do, we're not going to go into the breakout rooms, but we have sent to you a couple of case studies that we were wanting to to discuss. What I'd like to do before we look for some takeaways is maybe just throw this back to Danelle, and maybe ask Danelle if you any comments, maybe following on from what you've heard from our coaches.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Jen and Julie and Steph for sharing your unique perspectives on the conversation today. I think, Jen, just a few reflections, some common themes like that. Jen was talking about the importance of daily check-ins and conversations. And as much as we can have assessments or specific questions, I think what struck me from what Jen shared is it's always important to look at the context. You might see what is potentially a red flag and then find out it is a very situational specific or temporary, as these emotional states can be. But it's also a way just to connect and develop these relationships ongoingly, and having these open conversations and making ourselves approachable, and also being vulnerable with our athletes and sharing ourselves and our own red flags can help them to open up. And Julie, thank you for sharing your stories and difficult experiences with suicide. I know it's been really tough, probably really tough to go through, but I think you really highlight the importance of seeking support and making those partnerships with schools is a great idea. And again, for those of us who haven't experienced that, or coaches, like, don't wait for, I think your message is don't wait for a crisis to happen. Like, if you're traveling, plan ahead, because that can add an extra crisis to the crisis when you don't know who to reach out to or who to get support from. And so it cannot. So yeah, I think thanks for sharing those extra resources and those very helpful specific behaviors related to figure skating. Some very good concrete examples. And Steph, I think you really highlighted the importance of just getting to know athletes and individual personality characteristics, what makes them tick, and just the power of showing up and investing them a little bit to help them feel included and able just to be themselves within that sport environment. Whether they like to know, it reminds me of my thesis work, whether they like to know if they're a very structured, organized, anxious personality who likes to know the plan ahead of time, versus the other end of the spectrum who's like, I just want to show up and play. I don't need to know. So some good examples of just the power of showing up and being present and seeing the athletes for who they are and accepting their own unique personalities is great. So yeah, those are a few things that stood out for me, but maybe I just open it up now if there's any other questions or comments from the coaches or anyone joining the call today.
Yeah, thanks, Danelle. Maybe what we can do before we wrap up here is maybe just have a couple of minutes where maybe we ask people to just throw a couple of takeaways into the chat box, and maybe any questions that you have for Danelle. So I think Sarah's just put a game plan mental health and wellness resource link into the chat box, and of course we've got a handout for you that we'll be sending out to you later, as long as posting that on our website. So just wondered if anybody would have any takeaways from the session that they might want to just pop into the chat box before we start to wind down here. You know, maybe I'll start then. I think my feeling about coaching is hard. It's not an easy thing to do, contrary to popular belief. And I do think that some of the things that Steph sort of said with me did resonate, where as coaches we need to get to know our athletes, and we need to be able to read those signs and try to help them before things get a little bit past our control. And then I think the other thing as coaches, we need to know where to look. Coaching is hard, and most of us as coaches are not mental performance consultants, and I think it's really important for us to recognize that we can't fix everything ourselves, as we can't as coaches, and there is a time for us to to seek outside help. Okay, so not seeing anything else in the chat box. I'd like to finish as I started by thanking everybody for joining us this afternoon. Again, many thanks personally to Sarah and Charlene, and to our presenters. Just fantastic job today. Thanks Danelle, Jen, Julie, and to Steph. And I'll leave Sarah with any last words as she's controlling the recording button.
It looks like we have multiple questions as well in the chat box that have just come through, Andrew.
Yeah, I just saw those in as well. So a couple of takeaways to share. We had one, the red flag being different across your group of athletes, and the over-exercising example kind of really sticking out. And actually recording how many one-on-ones or deep conversations you've had with athletes over a specific period of time, and kind of being intentional about making time for this. And then another one that came in is this generation more anxious, so shifted on arousal spectrum towards hyper-aroused, and have perfectionistic tendencies compared to those in the past? If so, what strategies should we consider applying? So Danelle, maybe I'll ask if you could share your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking about that a little bit before the call today. As you know, when we look at the research and the rates of suicide and teens has increased every year. And I think I don't have the stats in front of me. We know it's going up. There's more reporting of anxiety and depression, and it's a complicated, and there's several factors that can contribute to that. But I guess on the flip side, I always see, well, the positive is that people are recognizing these emotions and symptoms more easily. So there's more conversation about it. So I always think it's increasing, but there's also more conversation around it, which is a positive, so we can address these things. And that's what we're here about today. So whether we see it, and then I think what today's conversation also highlights is the individual culture of every sport is so different. So knowing that norm and behaviors in your, whether it's figure skating, whether it's an endurance sport, whether it's rugby, whether it's soccer. So when we're thinking of strategies, I always go back to knowing the individual in their particular context and sport. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Danelle, for that. And yeah, just a couple of other reflections to share as well. Finding the additional information in the first aid kit to be an easy and reasonable thing to do. Another comment, lots of good ideas and actions to take. I like the list of conversation starters, which gives an easy way to gain insight into your athletes' challenges in a way that will allow them to share. And I'll just kind of add on to that, Danelle has offered to help share these slides as a PDF. So we'll circulate those along with the recordings, and that will have those conversation starter prompts. And then patience and giving the team the benefit of the doubt being an important insight as well, which I think was maybe one of Jen's suggestions. So thanks for bringing that to light for us as well. Mm-hmm. So I don't see any kind of final questions or comments coming through. So leading off of what Andrew said, of course, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And to Danelle, Jen, Julie, and Steph, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us this afternoon, your real lived experiences and the tangible strategies you brought forward. We're hugely appreciative of your time and your expertise. So thank you for joining us. And we'll be following up within the next couple of days with all of the recording and the follow-up materials for everyone. So thank you again and have a great afternoon.
Everyone.